welcome to the channel. This build is the Tamiya Cromwell Mk4 1/48 scale with some resin parts from BlackDog. Straight away I'm liking the die cast chassis. Much prefer this to the plastic chassis and metal weights I got with the M10 Achilles. Although not complaining, still a good kit. Starting off with the drive sprocket and wheels. I didn't glue them onto the chassis just yet. I wanted the running gear removable, so when it come to painting and weathering later on, things were slightly easier. The tracks were glued into place onto the wheels. You'll see later on I didn't go berserk with the mud on the lower half of the tank, but the little bit I did put on was easier with those wheels and tracks out the way. Once the tracks were on both sides, the running gear came off and went back on no problem. I got cracking gluing other parts into place, putting in the 2 screws to keep the model together while I fit other parts such as mud guards and things like that. Just ignore that tap dripping in the background there. I think I was that zoned out of what was going on around us I didn't even hear it. No issues at all gluing any parts into place. I think it took longer to clean up the parts after cutting them from the sprue than what it did to assemble the whole model. The quality of these Tamiya kits from what I've seen so far is always top notch. I didn't use all of the resin parts I got in the BlackDog kit, just the Hessian tape turret, jerry cans on the back with a little bit of storage, plus the open storage box. All these were super glued into place. Hatches were left open in the turret. I was going to keep them closed, but since there was an open storage box, I thought I'd keep these hatches open too. I did cut the end off the plastic gun barrel in the Tamiya kit, but then dropped it. Still to this day I have no idea where it is, but luckily I had this metal one in the cupboard. Here's a quick look before I dose the whole thing in NATO black. All the Tamiya paints used are diluted with Tamiya lacquer thinner retarder type. Once the NATO black was on, the base coat was an olive drab with a few drops of yellow to bring out the green a little bit. Then afterwards I lightened this mix with a few drops of white and went round the centre of the panels to give that faded paint effect, as apparently olive drab used to fade quite a bit on these tanks. parts of the stowage were buff, with 1 drop of olive green, diluted with Tamiya lacquer thinner retarder type. It took a few coats to get even coverage. Other parts of the stowage khaki with 1 drop of flat earth, both mixes around 5:1 ratio. By playing with the ratio a little bit, I darkened each mix, went in between the creases of the stowage, then playing with the ratio again, I lightened the mix and went over the top, adding some highlights with the airbrush. I used Iraqi sand for the wooden parts of the tools and then went over later with a light brown filter. I used flat aluminium for the contact points of the tracks, going over each one individually, then once dry, heavily diluting some red brown with Tamiya lacquer thinner, I went over every part of the track. The idea was to have the aluminium show through the red brown just a bit. There it is all dry. Not as much aluminium shown through as I'd have liked, but I dry brushed a little bit on just to get that effect I was looking for. Then with the Europe Earth pigment mixed with enamel thinners, I went in between the contact points of the track. Once dry, this looks a lot lighter than what it is now. Not much of this will be visible. Not really a tidy job either, but I just wanted a slight shadow along the top using some dark wash. And then afterwards I went round blending things in a little bit with some enamel thinners. I just wanted a little bit of mud on the bottom end shown through the wheels once I put them on. Not much at all, and because I wanted the mud to look dry, using the same Europe Earth pigment I used on the tracks, I went over the top of the mud and blended that in slightly. Running gear was super glued into place, the top was screwed on. Not many decals to go on, 3 on the front, 3 on the back. I brushed on micro set, and once the decal was in place, I brushed on the top micro sol. There was a decal for the turret, a star and circle, that I had to cut in half to get that to fit. I brushed NATO green onto all the Hessian tape, couple of coats to get even coverage. I chose NATO green because it didn't really match anything else on the tank and I wanted the Hessian tape to stand out slightly. I lightened the NATO green with a few drops of buff and then just picked out at random the odd bit here and there just to vary the colour slightly. Once this was finished and all dry, I gave the whole model a coat of gloss varnish, then left it overnight before the next step. With the dark wash I went round all panel lines, bolts, rivets, stowage creases. Probably my favourite part of the build, going round with the dark wash, then cleaning things up with enamel thinners. I think it's just the difference it makes to the model once this step is done. In the past I did learn the hard way to let the dark wash dry first before trying to tidy things up with enamel thinners. Just makes things a lot harder in my opinion, trying to remove excess while it's still wet. This was a 50-50 mix of red, brown and dark grey, just going round any parts of the tank which would see heavy use or scraping against things where the paint had come off. Towards the end I was starting to get a bit pushed for time, so I didn't really go too far with paint chips, just enough to rough the tank up a little bit. In a lot of these same places I went round with a rust wash, then blending that in with enamel thinners after. Sorry about the fan in the background, you can tell in the UK we're not used to the first bit of hot weather. When I'd finished with the rust wash and blending that in, it was back across to the paint booth with some heavily diluted buff to put some dust on the lower half of the tank. Then using a light dust pigment dry, I went around the wheels and inside the tracks. Following this I gave the model a coat of Humbrol matte varnish. Last thing, I wanted to use a metal tow cable instead of the bit of string that you get in the kit. For this I used a mix of red, brown and metallic grey. This was super glued into place and then that was it. Thank you for watching. See you next time.